Hello and welcome to a tutorial campaign for Europa Universalis IV, a grand strategy game set in the Age of Sail by Paradox Interactive. This series of videos is going to be aimed at newer players. We're going to be focusing on some of the mechanics, a little bit of the interface, but not too much since that can mostly be figured out. We're also going to look at strategy, sort of recommendations for how I start the game, things to look at, and how you make decisions throughout the game. Now, the traditional tutorial choice for this game, I'm going to call it EU4 as an abbreviation since Europa Universalis IV is quite hard to say properly. The traditional tutorial nation in EU4 is Portugal. It's on the end of Europe, doesn't have a lot of complicated relationships with its neighbors. Its one big neighbor that can actually get to it by land is friendly to it 99% of the time. And it's a good, safe nation to start from. But I'm actually going to go in a different direction here. I feel like war is one of the central concepts of this game. And the earlier you become comfortable with going to war, the better. So rather than choose Portugal, a nation that has relatively little to gain from war, it might want to fight Morocco a little bit for some of North Africa, but other than that, largely just sits still and colonizes, at least in a tutorial campaign. We're going to pick up France. France is a very strong nation. It's one of the biggest nations, at least in terms of economic base, that you can start with. It's in the highest technology group, so you don't have any issues with technology. And it's just generally a very strong nation, strong position. So we still should be relatively safe because nobody's going to want to attack the behemoth. But we'll also get to play around with throwing our weight around a little bit and conquering some land. Right. I do play with a couple of Mons, so you may see a couple of differences in numbers from your game to mine. Mostly I play with the number of crown colonies turned up so that colonial nations don't pop into existence immediately, and a couple of other minor things. So if you do see some differences, that's where they're coming from, very likely. So for this episode, I want to look at high-level goals for the game and also a little bit of interface, what you're looking at, since for complete newcomers, the screen is a bewildering array of stuff that you may or may not understand. So let's start with high-level goals. This is the first thing I do when I sit down to play the game, usually even before I'll log in and or start the game and choose a country. Well, yeah, choose the country before I log in and play the game, but whatever. So this game, Europa Universalis IV, doesn't have any set game win conditions. There's no point at which you get a screen saying, hey, you won, you're awesome, would you like to play again? The only sort of default game condition that you could sort of treat as an automatic win would be owning every province in the world. This is possible to do. It requires a very good player to do it. There are plenty of people out there that have done so and have posted about it. Some of them starting with quite weak positions, like a tiny one province country somewhere in the middle of Asia, conquer the entire world. However, it's pretty hard, and it's definitely not something you want to aim at the beginning of the game. It's also relatively tedious. Requires good luck and a lot of micromanagement in order to finish it by the time that the game ends. And so we're not going to aim for that. I probably never will aim for world conquest unless I'm feeling really bored. So I generally prefer to set my own win conditions that are, somewhat different from world conquest. So in this particular tutorial France campaign, there's three things that I want to look at doing as goals for the series. One of them is a relatively short-term goal, and the other two are medium to longer-term goals. And we'll look at what those goals are and what some of the challenges and things we need to take into account are when pursuing those goals. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is acquire all of the land that belongs to modern France under my country. This is the Age of Sail. Modern countries did not have the borders that you would expect them to have. Generally, a few of them have borders that are somewhat close. Hungary is not terribly off, I don't think. England is pretty accurate. But there's a whole chunk of France that's owned by England, and another chunk that's owned by Burgundy, and another chunk that's owned by Provence, or excuse me, it's not a chunk of France because it doesn't belong to France, but it's what we traditionally consider France, and the modern nation of France owns. So the first goal is to get all of that land that really should belong to France, belonging to France. And the major difficulties that potentially lie in the way in that particular goal, that's the short-term one, incidentally, because it won't take us all that long. The major difficulties that lie in the way there are England and Burgundy. There are a few other countries, the Provence and Brittany, that owns quite a bit of French land too, but they're not very big, and they'll go down without too much difficulty. I'll be able to manage that without really, over-strategizing that. However, England is just about as powerful as we are, although they are split between traditional England land and the continental lands that they still own on French soil. The other major player is Burgundy. Burgundy itself is not all that large, at least after the Common Sense expansion. However, the Burgundy has a lot of small nations that will always assist it. Diplomatic concept that I'll explain a little later, but basically, whenever you fight Burgundy, you're also going to be fighting Holland and Brabant and Nevers and a couple others that I probably can't remember off the top of my head. So Burgundy doesn't look as big, but it actually is quite threatening as well. So we're going to have to obtain our Burgundian land and our English land back, as well as pick off the small guys when it's appropriate to do so. So for the second goal, this is the age of sail. It's a time when colonies were a thing. We're a little earlier than Columbus, as you can see. We're at 1444. But discovery of the world, all this stuff that's out here in the uncovered map, it's called Terra Incognita in the game. Discovering that and colonizing it is a major part of the game for a lot of the nations. Certainly for the western part of Europe. I'm not sure how much Lithuania cares about colonies, but we do. So. And the second goal for this game is going to be to colonize as much of North America as we can get our grubby little hands on, starting with the Caribbean, probably. The reason I like to start with the Caribbean is because it's one of the more valuable sections of the North American continent, and it's also, because of how trade works in this game, which I'll get to in a future episode, it's very valuable to control the Caribbean. In a lot of games, I tend to like to build a sea route to Asia to get the spice trade going and the Chinaware trade going. I'm actually going to ignore that in this game. I've been playing that a lot lately, and I don't want to do it with this tutorial series. It's also, I don't feel like France is really all that well positioned for it. And in any case, I just want to concentrate on North America. I'll probably mostly be ignoring South America too, although I may take bites out of it. But we're going to be in the New World and leaving the African tribes and China and India and Indonesia and all those rich areas to the east mostly alone. And the big concern with colonization, of course, is that it's a race. And there are two nations in particular that will jump in with both feet and start colonizing as soon as they can possibly do so. And that's Portugal and Castile, who are neighbors on the Iberian Peninsula. It's this area down here where modern Spain and modern Portugal, of course, is. So Portugal in particular is heavily colonial focused, even when played by the artificial intelligence. So we can expect it to race us for some of the colonies, and Castile as well. They tend to be focused on more South America these days, at least from my past playthroughs. But we'll see. They may well try to take some of the Caribbean, and we'll have to take it away from them. England will also get involved in the colonial race as well, but they don't typically do as well. They're too late to the party. So in order to do that, we're going to have to put some serious planning into the colonial game. Not because we can jump in on colonizing right away. In fact, getting to the New World will take probably 40 years at least. But we need to do certain things to prepare for that, and I'll sort of talk about some of that as we go. We're also just going to want to try to keep Portugal and Castile in check as much as possible. We're not trying to prevent them from colonizing. Portugal will often go down the coast of Africa, and if they want to do that rather than mess around in the New World, then more power to them. Go trade with India. We don't care. Just get out of our North America. Right. So the third goal, and this is much more of an open-ended sort of long-term goal, is to just build a big European empire. We're going to do the Napoleon, I guess. Although we might well take over the British Isles too. I don't know. It depends on what openings we see, what land looks valuable, and what I think is interesting. So we might end up taking part of the Iberian Peninsula. We might end up taking the British Isles. We might end up pushing into modern Germany and Italy. We'll see. It's actually a very open-ended goal, but European land's very valuable. Building a big European empire, basically nobody's ever going to be able to match you if you do that. So that's pretty much enough of a win condition for we'd be able to dominate the globe, for the most part, if we had that. So those are our three goals for this particular segment, for this particular campaign. Alright, so those of you who are familiar with the game probably will want to bail here for the next segment, because I'm mostly going to spend the rest of the time outlining a few of the interface pieces. So, obviously you have the big game map in the center, which you can move around and zoom. I'm going to zoom in now to my country, France. You can see the armies show up on the map. There are these things with the shield icon. If you zoom way in, you can see that it's a little man, but most of the time you don't actually put it at that level. The number indicates the size of the army, so this is a size 29 army, this is a size 1 army. These things that are sort of hanging out in the water, you can zoom in and see that their boats are your naval fleet. My navy is rather pathetic, actually. No, it's just as big as this one, which belongs to my neighbor Brittany. But England in particular has a very strong navy, and we'll be dealing with that next time. Not by sinking it, we'll be accounting for it next time. Right, these little castle or tower looking icons on the map are forts. Those are used to defend your terrain. Any area that's adjacent to a fort basically is hard for the enemy. The enemy can take control of it, but can't really retain control of it until they take the fort, and they can't move past the fort. So if somebody's coming in from this direction and they wanted to move into the heartland, they're probably going to have to take out the fort in Lyonnais first before they can get into my my heartland area. I didn't really talk about provinces, which I probably should do. These areas outlined by this sort of light gray or dark gray but thin line, these are provinces. So this is the province of Champagne, this is the province of Paris. It's also a city, but in this case it's a province. Caux and Normandy and Alençon, and forgive me if my French pronunciations are terrible, I'm doing my best. And then you can see the larger colored borders indicate where countries begin and end. So France is this nice dark blue that I like the color of a lot. And you can see some of the other countries that are nearby. Typically, the game is, because it's a map-based game, there's a lot of different map modes that you'll want to use to look at the game. This is the default one the game starts with. It's the dynamic or the terrain one that shows all the mountains and stuff. Not really the most useful map mode. I play most of the game on what's called political map mode. So if you want to change your map modes, this is this section down here. There are 6 of them that are available quickly, and then you can open a panel that shows you all of them that exist. I'm mostly going to go over these as they're useful. Some of them are relatively unuseful in general. I can't remember the last time I actually cared to check the climate map mode, for instance. Oh look, it's temperate, and there's arid land in North Africa. Who would have guessed? But I will talk about some of the important ones when they come up for decision-making strategy and just generally, playing the game. So the first thing that's going to come up is the political map mode, because I play 99% of the game in political map mode. So that is the second button with the flag. You can use W as a shortcut, and probably for the foreseeable future I will use it as a shortcut because I'm so used to hitting it. So if you see it's a switch back to political map mode for no apparent reason, I probably hit the W key. So this is a map mode that is much more clearly outlines the countries. You don't, instead of having to look at that narrow little border, the whole country's colored in the country's color. So you can easily see the boundaries of France, and you can see these other lands. Incidentally, the land for goal number 1 that I want to obtain is these 3 provinces here: Savoy, which belongs to France now, All of this 4 clusters, these 3 Burgundy and this other one that belongs to Burgundy's minor partner, Lorraine and Alsace here, and Provence, and not Luxembourg, although I may take that anyway, but Nevers, I don't think Cambrai belongs to us. I'm not even sure Rothel belongs to us, but Picardy and Calais for sure, and yeah, that might be it. We might not take Artois. We'll see. We'll take as much land as we can get, frankly, because, you know, if we don't need it because it's French, we can use it because it's European, right? So, anyway, political map mode, that's typically what I'll use, just because it's much easier, you know, zoom out and get a really good perspective on where the countries are. Incidentally, you know, as I mentioned, countries not being very unified, you think, you know, France has some issues with not owning all of its land. Look at Germany. It's just a big mess. Nobody's really dominant here. Maybe you could think Bohemia might be, but they're really not. All these countries will spend the entire game bickering and fighting each other, unless I come in and try to kill them, in which case they'll not be very happy and unite against me. And Italy's not in much better shape. There's a few bigger countries like Naples, although Naples doesn't even belong to Naples. They belong to Aragon right now. Savoy's pretty decently sized. Milan's not bad. Venice is not bad. But a bunch of little guys, and again, Italy will probably not unite. A player can unite it pretty easily, but the AI will usually fail to do so. And that's actually historic. Italy did not actually unify in this time period. It occurred after the game would end. The game runs through I want to say 1814, but I'm not 100% sure on that. It's the first quarter of the 19th century. So Italy, Germany had not formed into cohesive units by that time, although there were far less of these little German states by that point. Still a number of them, but not quite this many. And as you can see, you know, even Spain is still split between Castile and Aragon, and you've got Granada, which is the Muslim kingdom that existed before Castile came and took them out. Or mostly took them out. They will get taken out at some point during this game, probably within the first 20 years. Castile will just eat this land. Right, so other elements of the interface that we want to take a look at. Obviously, you've got the date at the top right-hand corner. That's mostly just a reference point. The game speed, we will not be playing on speed 1, except possibly during some wars. It's quite slow for most of the game. This is called the outliner. It lists a bunch of important stuff that you probably care about. You can actually toggle what's in here. I might be doing that at some point. In this case, it's listing our diplomats, the armies that we have, which also provides a convenient way for getting back to them. So if I'm over, you know, I don't know, admiring the mess that is modern Russia, I can click on this army and it'll take me right back there and actually bring up the screen so I can do things with it. But I'll explain the army interface in a little later. So outliner is useful for giving quick orders and finding stuff and just generally getting a good sense of what your country looks like. Got these this sort of bar across the top, which is information and resources. I've got money here. I've got 255. It's called ducats, gold, whatever you want to call it. Doesn't much matter. Those are used for paying for things. Relatively limited resources at the beginning of the game. If you're halfway competent by the middle of the game, you will generally have more ducats than you know what to do with. So, you know, we'll be paying some attention to that, especially in the beginning of the game. The next thing over here with the little soldier icons is manpower. Manpower is used to build up armies and to reinforce existing armies when they take casualties. So casualties are inevitable in EU4. So if you want to have some manpower to back up your armies when they take casualties in battle. They take casualties just from running around, frankly. People get diseases and die and get lost on the way, and I don't know exactly what happens to them. They lose 100 men walking one province over. But you do need to keep your manpower up. We've got 35,023 men, young men, just waiting to join our army if we decided we needed them. Those two are, you know, our primary resources. The other major resource we have, I'm going to skip over these for now, are these three things here, the little paper with a quill and the bird and the sword. These are our power pools. So we have an administrative power, we have diplomatic power, and military power. And these are used to fund various important things, including technology, acquisition of new land, diplomatic initiatives, but mostly technology and what's called ideas, which are ways in which we customize our nation to fit the purpose that we're pursuing with it. So I would say those three are by far the most important resources in the game, much more important than ducats, money, or manpower, although those are worth keeping an eye on too. At a certain point in the game, we may no longer care about our manpower and our ducats because we got so much of it. We will always care about our power pools. They're called monarch points, actually. So I'm sorry, it should be administrative points and not administrative power. But the tooltip calls it administrative power, so I can't be far off. So those are the 5 resources that we're going to care about. The rest of this stuff is mostly informational. The little scales icon shows our stability. Stability is how much our nation is got its stuff together, basically. Low stability means we have rebels. We lose a lot of income, to tax income, because people can't collect it appropriately, and we're looked on with disfavor. It's actually, and positive stability is the reverse. It means that people really like us. Our people are happy with us. It doesn't reflect how happy the rest of the world was with us. That's something else entirely. So stability is actually much worse if it's negative than the benefit you get for being positive. So we're probably going to focus on trying to keep it around +1. We may move it up to higher than that at some point, but we mostly want to keep it out of the negative range. The next thing over that has the little hourglass is prestige. That's a measure of how much our nobles and the rest of the world thinks that we are an awesome, awesome nation. And it runs from, I believe, -100 to 100. We'll typically have that up pretty high. It's a little less, since the Common Sense patch, it's a little bit less easy to accumulate mass prestige and just keep it at 100. But we'll still keep it up without too much difficulty. And it has a bunch of minor effects that we probably won't pay a whole lot of attention to unless they come up in particular. The next thing over with the crown is our legitimacy. This is something that belongs to monarchies, of which we are one. There are other kinds of governments in the game. There are theocracies that have devotion and republics that have republican tradition. Basically, this is a measure of how I don't know, how true our government appears to be. Legitimacy, how much we're a legitimate heir to the throne. Was our father actually in the line of succession, or did we do something weird like go through our mother's first cousin or something to get the throne? And also just a sense of, are we behaving like a king would? So there are certain kinds of events that will pop up that allow us to trade off legitimacy for something else, something usually good. It's like something like advisor talks back to you. Do you have him executed for a prestige boost, or do you accept his advice for some PowerPoints and a loss of legitimacy because we're listening to an advisor and we're the king? We shouldn't be doing that. Well, whatever. So again, that's mostly something we won't be paying a whole lot of attention to unless we get an heir that is not in the direct line of succession, and at which point it will drop and we will have to pay more attention to it. Most of the time in the game, under normal succession circumstances, that will just kind of hover around 90 to 100. Finally, the last thing is power projection, and that's mostly a measure of how much we're throwing our muscle around, and that is actually one of the better of these ratings, and we'll be paying a fair amount of attention to that. I'll explain more what it's for later. And then these 4 things here are our envoys. Envoys are people that we send out to do various tasks. So we have 2 merchants that we can send out to steer trade. I'm not going to talk about trade at this point. I'll get to it at some point. We have no colonists, so we can't colonize until we get some. We have 3 diplomats. Diplomats are who you send to interact with the rest of the nations, unless you're sending your army and you're fighting a war, in which case you're not really that interested in your diplomats. Finally, we have a missionary who's used to convert our land to our religion, which at this point for all of Europe is Catholic, or all of Western Europe, I should say, is Catholic. So he's not going to be useful for a while. We're not going to conquer any land that is not Catholic for quite a while. Around the 1500 date, the Protestant Reformation will happen, at which point some of this land will start flipping to Protestant, and then the missionary starts to become useful again. Finally, we've got this section here. This is the alert section. It tells us about things that we might want to pay attention to. Red is generally stuff you really do want to pay attention to. It's things like you have a penalty because you don't have enough rivals. I'll talk about what that means later. Yellow is warnings about things that you may want to take a look at, but there's actually legitimate reasons for leaving a yellow or orange alert up. In this case, it's telling me I have too many generals, and I'm going to tell it I don't care, because France starts with pretty awesome generals, and I actually want to use those. I don't want to fire one to eliminate the alert. And then green stuff is stuff that's informational, that you may want to know about, but is also not necessarily a high priority stuff, and I'll be routinely leaving green stuff up here for long periods of time. especially that you can build buildings. Great, really, thanks. It's a game with buildings. I can build them. Thank you, game. Finally, we have two very important buttons up here. The shield button that has my my flag on it, not only to remind you who you are in case you forgot, but it opens what's called the Kingdom menu, which is your main interface for adjusting lots of things about your kingdom. There's all kinds of tabs in here. I am not going to walk through all of these at this point. That'll make a long video very much longer. Instead, we'll talk about them when they come up. Finally, there's the production interface, or what I tend to call the quick build system, that lets you build and manipulate your provinces easily. And again, I'll cover that in much more detail when we're actually interested in it. And I think that's about it. I think the only other thing of note is the ledger icon down here that I'll be using at some point in the next video to talk about when we decide who we want to go to war with next. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on our tutorial France series.